Have you ever stopped to think about how some really iconic cultural things get started? You know, the stuff that defines a whole scene, its sound, its style, even how people talk.
Oh, yeah.
It's often not some big plan, right? It's more like these weird, almost accidental moments, plus
Yeah,
a lot of hustle.
exactly. You see it all the time with underground legends.
Yeah.
Music, art, even, specific products like we were
Uh,
talking about today, they just bubble up. It's way more interesting than something cooked up in marketing.
totally. It's that raw energy, that evolution that we're diving into today.
Hmm.
Welcome, everyone. We're digging deep into the history, kind of gritty and often missed, of three huge East Coast cannabis strains, Haze, Piff, and Sour Diesel. We're looking at their key years, say, the 80s through the 2000s.
Yeah, we want to unpack how just a few chance meetings, these really complex underground networks and that classic East Coast hustle turned these strains into absolute icons.
Right.
And we're pulling this straight from the insights in Nug Notso, which really lays out this whole fascinating story.
Think of this as like the inside track, understanding the real impact these strains had, not just in cannabis circles, but way beyond into wider culture, even business, kind of.
Mm.
So for you listening, this is a chance to get the, let's call it the secret history behind names you've probably heard, and see how these little moments, these specific people, even screw-ups, can spark these huge cultural waves.
Yeah, things that last for decades.
Okay, so let's get into it. The story kind of kicks off way back 1970s, Santa Cruz, California.
Right.
You have these two figures, the Haze Brothers, R and J, and they start this pretty wild breeding project. They're crossing all these different landrace sativas.
Which are like the original native strains from specific places, yeah.
Exactly. So Thailand, Colombia, Mexico, South India. What kind of foundation does that give you, genetically speaking, for what became original haze?
Well, that mix, it was everything. It created something super potent, very cerebral, that classic sativa high.
Yeah.
But also really variable, lots of different expressions.
Okay.
And what's cool is how it traveled. You had Nevil Schoenmaker in Holland working to stabilize it, make it more consistent.
Dutch connection.
Right. And then Sam the Skunkman, another big name, refined it more in Amsterdam. He even crossed it with Northern Lights, #5. That whole journey, that's what set the stage for the haze that eventually landed in New York and became, well, Piff.
Okay, so Haze is making waves internationally, but then, boom, another chance moment, 1991,
Yeah.
totally random. There's this teenager in Massachusetts, Greg, no idea he's about to make history. He's just at a Grateful Dead show in Indiana. How does a concert become this, like, pivotal moment?
It's pure luck, really. Greg and his buddy, they buy a bag of weed at the show called Dog Bud.
Dog Bud, okay.
Yeah. And it was just, like, unbelievably pungent, super strong, distinct smell.
Yeah.
Greg was so blown away, he actually tracked down the dealer later and bought a whole pound of it.
A whole pound, wow.
And inside that pound, 13 seeds. That's it. Just 13 seeds in this random bag from a concert.
13 seeds, that's nuts. And they turned out to be basically gold dust.
Pretty much. Greg sprouted some, and what came up was the original legendary Chemdawg 91.
Chemdawg 91.
The smell was intense, like fuel, skunk, citrus, all mixed together, and the potency was just off the charts for the time. It really set a new benchmark.
Right, a new standard.
Absolutely. And crucially, he shared it. He gave out cuts, clones to a few trusted growers on the East Coast.
Okay, so it starts to spread.
Yeah. And one of those growers was this dealer in Manhattan known only as Weasel. Weasel saw how powerful it was, how it was everywhere, and he's the one who renamed it Diesel.
Diesel, my diesel.
He said it felt like the fuel that kept NYC going, powering the whole underground scene.
The fuel that kept NYC going. I like that. Captures it perfectly. So while these strains are being created, kind of accidentally sometimes, the networks to move them are also forming.
Right, the infrastructure.
Late 80s, you've got Cuban and Dominican smugglers down in Miami playing this huge, often overlooked role. They're running haze up I-95 straight into New York City, into specifically Dominican and Puerto Rican neighborhoods. How did that shape Haze's identity there?
That's where haze really became Piff. In NYC, people started calling it Piff, or sometimes Uptown Haze, maybe Cuban Black Haze. The names reflected where it came from and who was moving it.
Got it.
Then another key moment for Sour Diesel, another accident really, 1994, right in NYC, a crop of that Chemdawg 91. It got accidentally pollinated by super skunk.
Oops.
Yeah, and that cross, that accidental mix, that created the specific phenotype, the version that became the East Coast Sour Diesel, that fuel smell, the energetic high. Another bit of pure chance creating a legend.
So we've got Pip really embedded in the city, especially uptown, like Washington Heights, Harlem. And the crews there were running the Piff trade super efficiently, right? Using bike messengers, complex networks. Piff had this almost mythical vibe, didn't it? What made it so special?
Piff was just different. It looked different, kind of wispy sativa structure. Took a really long time to flower, like 11 to 14 weeks, which is ages in growing terms.
Wow, yeah. Harder to produce then.
Exactly. Made it rarer. But the defining thing was the smell. This really distinct, spicy, incense-like aroma.
Incense?
Yeah, that's why it got nicknames like the Church or Frankie's incense. And because it was clone only, you couldn't grow it from seed easily, only cuttings and hard to grow. It was super rare. Became one of the most exclusive and expensive strains in the city.
Okay. Exclusivity drives demand. And that demand for both Piff and the sour diesel that was coming up, it fueled this whole intense delivery scene.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking pagers, flip phones, going nuts. This is way before apps. It's that East Coast hustle you mentioned, right? That underground engine.
Absolutely. Yeah. But by the late 90s, sour diesel really started to take over the NYC underground.
Okay, why the shift?
Well, it generally had a higher THC. The flowering time was a bit shorter than Piff, which growers liked, made it more viable commercially. And that smell, that overpowering fuel aroma, was just instantly recognizable. Kind of the best of both worlds for a lot of people.
And there's a key figure here in spreading Sour DAJ, or Asshole Joe, apparently.
Yeah, quite the name.
What was his deal? How did he push sour diesel out from New York?
AJ worked a lot with those Chemdawg genetics, and crucially, he was big on distributing the Sour D clone-only cut. He saw the potential.
Right.
And he really helped fuel its spread beyond NYC, down to Florida, up through New England, even out to Atlanta. He was a major player in its distribution network.
So by the late 2000s, sour diesel is just king on the East Coast.
No question.
That shorter bloom, the crazy pungent fuel smell. You hear stories like, smelled like leaking gasoline. You could smell it blocks away.
Totally. Instantly recognizable.
And that energetic, euphoric high, it just became the standard.
You found it everywhere. Parties, rap studios, those high-end delivery services running from NYC all the way down to Atlanta. That clone-only ECSD, East Coast Sour Diesel, that cut was the gold standard. And because it was scarce but amazing quality, the prices were nuts. Like $100 for an eighth, $500 plus for an ounce. That tells you everything about the demand.
And connecting this back to culture, these strains weren't just smoked, they got woven into the fabric, especially hip-hop.
Oh, massively.
You had guys like Branson, this legendary Harlem dealer, supplying Haze to the NYC elite, and suddenly you hear Biggie, Dipset, Nas rapping about it. It's amazing when a product becomes part of the lyrics, you know?
It really is. And then Cameron drops the Purple Haze album in 2004, plus countless other references and verses. It just cemented these strains, especially Haze variants and Sour D, as part of hip-hop history.
Right.
And Sour D's legacy. Pretty much sealed when High Times magazine, the Bible of cannabis culture, basically named it one of the 25 greatest strains of all time.
That's huge validation.
Yeah.
And it was because of that crazy potency, that unforgettable fuel smell, and just its complete dominance on the East Coast.
Yeah.
It really does highlight that whole East Coast hustle idea, finding something rare, high quality, and building these ingenious networks to get it out there. That's how icons were made.
Exactly.
So wrapping this up, what does this journey mean for you listening? We followed these strains from Haze's roots in global land races and its trip across the Atlantic to Sour Diesel basically being born by accident at a dead show and then taking over, and Piff's unique, almost spiritual incense vibe in the NYC underground. It's a wild ride.
And we saw how specific traits mattered hugely. Sour Diesel's intense fuel smell, that leaking gasoline thing and its strength, or Piff's unique spicy scent, the Church. Those characteristics defined them.
Yeah, they weren't generic. And you absolutely have to acknowledge the people and the networks. Greg finding those seeds, Weasel naming Diesel, AJ spreading the clones, Branson dealing Haze, the smugglers, the crews in the Heights and Harlem.
They were the engines. They embodied that hustle. They built the legends, person by person, deal by deal.
And the economics were stark. Piff, the ECSD cut, commanding those huge prices, $100 an eighth, over $500 an ounce. That wasn't just about weed, it was about rarity, demand, status.
Definitely. The market spoke loud and clear.
Plus, that indelible mark on culture, hip-hop shout-outs from Biggie, Dipset, Nas, Cameron's album, and High Times calling Sour D one of the greatest ever. These weren't just strains, they were cultural moments.
Yeah, this whole story just shows that dynamic mix, right? Unique genetics, random events, smart cultivation, these powerful underground networks, all coming together to shape an industry and really a whole cultural scene.
It shows how something niche, something underground, fueled by hustle and quality, can totally become a cornerstone of culture.
Absolutely. It influenced so much beyond just cannabis itself.
So here's something to chew on as you go about your day. Think about that East Coast hustle, that idea that what's rare, exclusive, and fire will always be in demand. How does that principle play out, maybe not just with weed, but in creating value and legends in other parts of life? Maybe areas you wouldn't even expect. It just shows that real demand, the start of something huge, can pop up in the most surprising, unofficial ways.